really?
Yeah.
Back to play the numbers. Only way forward to travel.
Please. Good afternoon and welcome to the July 2023 meeting of the Rotary Club of Beavercreek. I want to thank our greeters, our past president Brandon Huff and Denny Jarvie, who is also going to do an invocation for us in a moment. I'd like to thank Beth Handworker for getting us set up and for selling tickets. Pete Bales, Mark Weinstein, and Mike Swig for the great programs we have, and Jim Gundel for taking care of us on the website side. Denny Jarvie, would you give us an invocation, please?
Good afternoon. Would you join me in prayer? Oh, Holy Creator, we thank you for this gorgeous day of blessed rain. We thank you especially for the big hearts of people in Rotary that are willing to travel around the world to eradicate polio. We ask you for their safety and for their willingness to be able to do this very tough job. And we ask your help in cleaning out the last few cases that we have of live polio. We thank you for this food, and we thank you for the opportunity for fellowship and to serve. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Denny. All right, so Joe Jenkins, Secretary's report.
So we're at 61% and we have two guests today. Shannon Graham has a guest.
My guest today is Brianna. I'm just warning you, she is related. She is my niece. Again, working through her college, trying to be a young entrepreneur and doing everything I can to help her. So,
Well, all right.
And then Amanda's husband, David.
I have one day.
Our prosecutor, David Haney, is welcome. Okay, so technical glitches have prevented us from having a sergeant at arms report, so we're going to go straight to Happy Bucks. But first, I want to say, don't get used to all these short meetings. So we had my first meeting, we had a program canceled, I think. So anyway, we'll go. So Happy Bucks, who's got Happy Bucks? Brandon,
I got to go to Chicago real quick this week for a board meeting. And on my morning run, I got down to remember they call it Northerly Island. It's right along the lakefront. And since the last time I was there a few years ago, there's big, many acres of native plants. And I loved it. It was beautiful. And I was talking to a Chicagoan about it. And I also learned that that's kind of a famous area because that was called Meigs Airport, and a Mayor Daley was known for 20 years ago in the middle of the night. He went out there with bulldozers, made huge X's on the runway so that they couldn't use the airport the next day because he had been wanting to close that airport for 20 years. So the FAA fined him when he got his airport closed and they turned it into a big park. So funny little story. I like plans.
I like that happened, but you can go around and collect that.
I have a happy buck. This past Monday, I welcomed well over 400 people to the dedication of the Pioneers of Stealth Memorial that is now sitting in the Memorial Garden at the National Museum of the Air Force. It was absolutely stunning. And then we had a huge celebration banquet inside the Air Force Museum. Our speaker was Dr. Paul Kaminsky, who had been inducted into the Aviation Hall of Fame last October. And I used to report to him in the Pentagon when he was a colonel running stealth. And our main speaker at the dedication ceremony was retired four-star General Joel Ralston, who retired as the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces Europe. Prior to that, he was the twice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Prior to that, he was the Air Combat Command. I didn't know him as Joe because he was lieutenant in the same fighter squadron at Canada Air Base in Okinawa. That's my happy one.
Thank you, Danny.
I have a happy 20. Thank you for everyone who helped with the golf out on us. Everybody that came really helped set up, everyone just being present, it was awesome, it was a great turnout, so I was gonna say, thank you for, Rotary and everyone who helped with the, golf outing this week.
Thank you, sir. And
Fran and I have some happy blocks for 2.5 weeks of pleasant weather in San Francisco, California, visiting the grandkids and their parents.
all right. Hey,
Last Sunday, I got to go to the Tobias Zimmer barn rededication. That's at Wardinger Park.
That was nice.
And that barn was destroyed in the 2019. And so the city and the Beavercreek Historical Society got together and were able to rebuild kind of the exact replica of the barn that Bob Zimmer donated to the city many years ago. And it is gorgeous, beautiful. Their next phase, they'd like to add restrooms and a catering kitchen to that. And it's quite a expensive endeavor, but Bob Zimmer pledged $40,000 match to any dollar per dollar, up to 40,000, to kickstart that project. So I thought that was really cool, and that really made me happy and gave me a lot of community pride. So we're
right. Well, thanks. Don,
As some of you know, in my other life, I'm the president of the flyer, and this past weekend, we got to fly at the air show. First time in 6 years, and they landed safely, and plane is still intact.
it's a good thing. All right. Other happy bugs. Any announcements? I will make an announcement that next week, our program is our district governor. So let's try and get good attendance. Our assistant district governor will be introducing him. And I was looking at the roster, our district governor-elect is Donnie from Fairborn. Somehow Fairborn has 3 different assistant district governors. So I don't know if we should aspire to that, or we should be happy that we don't have to do it. Anyway, it's just of note. Okay. Ticket drawing. 338054. Vice five program. It's got to be going a little bit. It's going since February, but no.
Yeah, it's our queen artist drawn
All right, Pop Rose. Pete Bales is going to introduce our speaker.
that pot has to be getting about as much as the Queen of Hearts, right? $1 million in there. Yeah, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jill Waters. She sent me her bio a while ago to read, and quite frankly, I just kind of filed away and didn't read it. And then this week, as I was getting ready for the program, I pulled it back out and actually laughed out loud. So I'm excited to hear her talk. I'm excited to hear her experiences abroad, and it should be very exciting if her presentation is anything like the bio that she sent me. I'll read it to you. Dr. Jill Waters currently serves as Kettering Health as the Systems Director for Process Excellence, and was imported from California to the Dayton region just about a year ago. When asked why she moved to Ohio, she laughed and responded that her Rotary in California decided to make her president-elect. So she decided the only sane thing to do would be to move her husband and kids here. But the joke is on her because she joined the Oakwood Rotary Club and they convinced her to be sergeant at arms. Wow. Which we all know takes as much time as being president, I think. Right, Don?
Close.
Yeah, very close. She has a passion for international travel and has already traveled to 5 countries this year, with another 4 countries left on the horizon in 2023. When asked why she joined Rotary, she answered, "It was the greatest single opportunity to combine the passion of international community with servitude. which makes her a fantastic person to speak to us today on how we might better experience our international community right here at home in Orlando. So without further ado, and I quote, I welcome the fantastic, fabulous, prodigious Mr. or Dr. Jill Waters.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So Ed, where did Ed go? The one that just visited San Francisco. He already ran away? Dude, he really heard how bad this talk was. He had to leave. I was like, we were both in San Francisco. I grew up in Napa Valley. That's what I was like, oh, I miss San Francisco. Do I have a clicker or anything, or do I have a helper to advance slides or? Yeah, thanks. All right, okay, so today we're gonna talk a little bit about polio, what it looks like, a little bit about the vaccine, and then a call to action. I am gonna caveat everything I'm about to say. There's 3 pretty polarized statements or opinions that I have that are gonna be shared. It is not my intention to disengage half of the room. It's my intention just to have a conversation around it. The opinions that I'm going to share that a lot of people tend to disagree with is this is all based on the pretense that COVID was real. That vaccines do not harm and that they're good. They're not the way of the government to control us, those different kinds of fears that are out there. And then the third thing I talk about is the raise in vaccine hesitancy. So with no further ado, next slide. Okay, so for those of you that actually trust the person you're sitting next to, feel free to close your eyes and imagine this. But if you have less trust, keep them open. But imagine yourself, you're sitting in a dusty, busy, crowded marketplace. There's people bustling about you, going along their shopping. You're sitting there begging in the streets for money. A woman's rose-colored sari swishes past you in the dust, and a stranger hands you a crumpled up paper bill. As you try to reach out to grab the bill, you can't. Your mind cannot command your muscles to move because you're paralyzed. So what you do is you utilize your knee to kind of shift your arm up to grab the bill. And at the end of the day of begging, you grab with your foot, your satchel, and hobble home for the day. If you were closing your eyes, go ahead and open them. CNN did a story on this man in this picture. His name is Glenn Kumar. And by the way, I use a lot of, I think, Indian words, and I've been told I mispronounce every single one of them. So my huge apologies ahead of time. But Glenn Kumar contracted polio as a child and ended up with paralysis on many of his limbs. In his culture, it's common for fathers and brothers to take care of someone that falls into that type of difficulty. And his father and brother were dead, and so he had to move to New Delhi to pursue the only means of actually caring for himself, and that was begging in the streets. Let's go to the next slide. Polio looks like a lot of different things. I think many of us have seen the pictures of the iron lung, so I didn't put that here. But in these pictures, you see a paralyzed teacher teaching a group of paralyzed students, and you also see some structural aids. If you remember seeing Forrest Gump, and how he had those kind of weird things on his legs, that was because of his struggle with polio. Next slide. Polio actually is one of the oldest diseases that we have any kind of documentation of. So it's commonly believed that this man had polio, as evidenced by his withered leg and the use of a walking aid. Polio lives in an infected person's throat and intestines and spreads through feces or droplets. COVID, the pandemic we just lived through, also spreads through droplets. So if you think about how quickly COVID swept the world from when we became aware of it to when we had it in our communities, it would be very similar in how fast polio would spread today. Next slide. Polio, very similar to coronavirus or COVID. Also, most people that get it don't know they have it. They're asymptomatic. Around a quarter of the people that got polio had flu-like symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. They got better in about 3 days and moved on. Sorry for those of you that are still eating with that word. A smaller portion of them actually developed meningitis, about 5% of the people that got polio. And just like COVID, and we had different strains of COVID, so we had the Delta virus and the Gamma virus, all of the different kinds that came out. Polio has different virus strains as well. And so depending on the virus strain that you got, the chance of paralysis was 1 in 200 to 2,000. The majority of deaths that occurred around polio were because the respiratory muscles were paralyzed and they couldn't breathe. And so that's where they invented the iron lung to help those individuals breathe. Next slide. Thankfully, there's a vaccine. Currently in the United States, we don't use the drops, we use the jab. So if you get the jab, the polio vaccine as a child, you will most likely encounter symptoms associated with the jab. You have some redness and pain at the injection site, possibly spike in fever, get a little fussy for a couple days. Similar side effects with the drops. They spike a fever, some fussiness, they can have general malaise. However, the symptoms of the vaccine don't compare anywhere near the devastation of the virus itself. And let's see. The thing that I find most interesting is, well, we have a growing population in the United States of anti-vax community, whether that's because they're allergic to something in the vaccine, they have a religious obligation to not get the vaccine, or if they're fearful or have been fed misinformation. Due to the prevalence of that rising, we're actually starting to see polio in America again, which is too bad. That's why we can't ever release our efforts in the vaccine front for polio. But while we're battling convincing people to get the vaccine here, in other countries, you see the other side of ignorance. You see that they think that if they get 3 in one day, they're going to be more vaccinated or more protected from polio. And so Rotary partnered with Red Cross, CDC, some of the great people that we partner with, came up with rather an ingenious way of tracking who got it that year. And what they do is they dip the children's pinkies in this bright pink or purple indigo dye, and it stains their finger for 2 weeks. And so what you see is we focus all our efforts in on what's called National Immunization Day, but in reality it's kind of a 2-week span. And that's where all the polio efforts in the country take place in that 2-week span, so that we are guaranteed that the fingers will still be dyed and we're not giving out a dose to someone that doesn't need it. There's no harm in getting more than 1 dose, but there's no benefit either. So we want to stretch that resource. Next slide. Brief history lesson, 1955, the vaccine's developed, and by the end of the 1980s, we had eradicated it in the United States of America. In 1979, Rotary put together their first mission trip to the Philippines to inoculate over 6 million children with the polio vaccine. And just a few years later, we had set up our official Polio Plus program. A few years after that, we partnered with people like UNICEF, the WHO, oh, I'm sorry, not the WHO. My dad said that's not the same thing. WHO. And the American CDC. And by the end of the 1990s, we had successfully eradicated polio from places like North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. Then the Gates joined us in 2007, doubling plus some of our money and our efforts worldwide. And right when COVID was kicking off, right in the 2020s, we eradicated polio from Africa. So very exciting. Next slide. This whole first part of the presentation is just to make sure that you guys know you are a part of a group that is amazing and has incredible impact on a global scale. So we're so much more than just the communities we live in, and we serve the community at large. That partnered with the Rotary projects that different Rotaries do is incredible. As Pete mentioned, I joined Rotary because of the chance to combine international with servitude, right? My international passion, community with servitude. And when I moved to Oakwood, I was horrified to hear that my local club did not participate internationally. So I went to my president, I said, why don't we participate internationally? And through a conversation, he finally said, look, if there's something that you think we should be doing, do it. That's a typical Rotary president, right? So I asked around. I went to a couple different clubs. I ended up at RLI, which by the way is fantastic. It's November 4th for those of you that aren't aware. It's our Leadership Institute. You get to learn about the background of Rotary and some things that are happening in Rotary, such as DE&I, other hot topics. And it really prepares you to be the best Rotarian and officer you could be. So highly recommend that little plug there. But there I really got connected with a doctor named Hux down in Cincinnati and a couple other people that are very well traveled and very well participated in projects. And they all kind of helped me come to this conclusion that while Southwest Ohio does do amazing things in the international community, not everyone knows about it or cares. So this is the solution to that issue. Next slide. We're going to partner with Howard Tours, which is a Rotarian owned and operated travel agency located in Oakland, California, very close to San Francisco. They specialize in Rotary travel. And what I mean by that is they realize that not every Rotarian wants to live in a tent while they do something good. So their tours are typically 4 and 5-star hotels. You have a private translator, air conditioning the whole way. They specialize in tours that really let you see and be a tourist in the country, see projects that have happened in the country of choice, and do 1-day participation in a project or in the National Immunization Day polio efforts. We think we're going to India in 2024, and what I mean by we think is we are definitely going somewhere in 2024, but because National Immunization Day is orchestrated in a much larger effort, sometimes we don't get enough advance notice to put a group together. So right now, it looks like it'll either be India beginning of the year or Africa a little bit later in the year. Africa would be focused more on AIDS and general wellness and a project that we participate in to that local community, whereas India would be a national immunization project. I wanted to share just an example of the project they took in 2022. Next slide. On day 1, they left their home airport, and on day 2, they arrived in Delhi. For those of you that have not traveled half across the room, jet lag sucks. And so they didn't schedule it do the rest of day 2 other than try and stay awake until nighttime so that you could get a good night's sleep and wake up on their time frame. But day 3, they headed out as tourists and they got to see Old Delhi, Red Fort, Hamad Gandhi Museum, and Smriti. This is where I've been told I slaughter every word. Next slide. The next day they went and they actually got to see the tomb of Akbar the Great and the Taj Mahal. Very cool. They saw Agra Fort. The next day they had a free evening on top of seeing the Mughal fort of Fatehpur Sikri. You could see why I'm slaughtering it. I asked them about that free evening. And I said, hey, tell me about what people did that free evening. And the owner said that in general, there was a group of men that went out on a pub crawl while a bunch of women went to a spice market. But it should be noted that while there's a free evening, none of the prior things that I talked about were mandatory. If you didn't want to do it, don't do it. You don't want to see the Taj Mahal, don't go see the Taj Mahal. You're already in India. Next, or not quite, sorry. Day 6, they got to see the City Palace complex, a great place to look and see. I saw some of the pictures, and they saw the Jaipur Limb Factory. This is a Rotary project that was funded by over 200 Rotaries around the globe, and they create limbs, artificial limbs, for either polio victims, diabetic amputee victims, or anyone that needs an artificial limb. I find this one specifically fascinating because while it's funded from all over the world, they don't export limbs all over the world. So it's other communities giving to this one and then they give back. Let's go to the next slide. They did have dinner with the local clubs. On day 8, they saw St. Stephen's Hospital, which is a hospital specializing in post-polio surgeries. They have slightly different rules there, so they were actually able to talk to the patients and the doctors and ask questions. They had a Rotary Club lunch similar to this one. They had a special dinner event where 6 of the local Rotaries came together to put on a show full of dancing and the cuisine and the smells and the sights and the culture that they were proud to share with these Americans that came into their country. They participated on a Polio Plus committee helping shape the face of polio relief for years to come. Day 9, they participated in a Rotary rally and they got to see the Komstu Farfari project, which teaches microfinance sewing and hand stitching to women. Next slide. Days 10 and 11, they participated in polio immunization exercises. So basically day 10, everyone came to them, and day 11, they went door to door prior to going to the airport. So this one was an 11-day trip. Last year they went to Guatemala, it was 8 days. So their trips are all a little bit different. And when you ask about how much it costs, knowing that you're in 5- and 4-star hotels, next slide, it was $2,600 per person. So very reasonable cost, especially because all of your tours, all of your translators, everything's covered. What isn't covered in that cost is the airfare, and that's because I'm probably one of the brokest Rotarians in Ohio. I ride in a middle seat in the back of the plane where I can smell the sewage leaking out of the bathrooms wherever I go, and that's how I can afford to travel. Whereas I'm sure many of you in this room wouldn't be caught dead out of a wide flat seat. And so they understand that people have different budgets to travel with. They have different airlines they're dedicated to. Some people have enough on their black card that they can make this fun free on points. But every once in a while they did have to arrange airfare for someone, and that averaged out $1,500 a person. They were coming from the West Coast, so it's a slightly different price range, a little bit more over there because you're going the other way. And then if you went by yourself rather than with someone else, it was an extra $950 for single occupancy. That's because the cost of the hotel was split between two people at $2,600. Next slide. The last thing I'm going to share with you rather is there's typically 4 people that I give this talk to. The ones like me that are like, I don't care how, I will script, I will save, I will make it work, and I'm headed there. And then there's people like my average Oakwood Rotarian who's like, that's great, you should totally do that. Not interested. And then there's 2 more people. The ones that have the money, but they can't go because of their health, their age, their job, or the ones that can go but don't have the money. If you fall in one of those last 2 categories, just text me, my cell phone's up there, and we'll try to link the money back to someone that can go. I have seen clubs that said, you know, we will send someone, like you'll fundraise for your own self to send one of your own Rotarians, so those stories guaranteed come back into your club, and I think that's great. If that's what you do, you don't even have to call me. So I know I don't have a lot of the details right now, unfortunately, because of the short lead time of from when UNICEF lets us know when we can go to a country or not. We needed to get the word out ahead of time. And so I will utilize DACDB to do bulk send outs when we actually have the details. Please, at least one of you actually read your Rotary email. I admit I'm not that person for my club. But if you could bring it back and during an announcement, say, hey, that loud, like friendly blonde girl that talked really fast. She finally knows where she's going. Here's where she's going. If you're interested in yourself right here. What questions do you have on either polio, the trip, what to expect, anything?
Can you go back to the timeline? Why does it take so long to cure it in the different places, or what are the barriers you guys run into?
Sure. So I have not participated in an NID trip. If you want to go all the way back, there.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, we don't ever get a let up on rodeo vaccination. That's a new one on polio vaccinations because it relies on herd immunity and everyone being vaccinated. And so actually Rotary ran an analysis a few years ago that showed if we let up on polio vaccinations and stopped doing it, it would come back with a prevalence within 7 years. And there would be over 200 and something infections and possible deaths. So it is something that unfortunately Rotary never gets to give up on because it's so important. Now, the 2 countries that still have it, I believe they're Pakistan and Afghanistan, there's like 5 cases. It's not like they were seeing hundreds of thousands of cases from those countries, even though they have such a high population. It's that we just have to be prevalent. We have to get into every child in every corner. And so that's why you see kind of that long buildup. Does that help? Yes.
A couple of years ago, there was news that there was polio discovered in New York, a couple of cases. What's the status of that? Is there any polio left in this country?
So as of right now, the best of my knowledge is that is true. It did happen, and because of the rising prevalence of the anti-vax community, whether you fall into one of the 3 categories, the 2 that I think are completely agreeable and the one that's fed by misinformation. What ended up happening is, not to get too political here, healthcare and science rely on statistics, and you have to interpret those statistics appropriately. Otherwise, you make incorrect inferences and share incorrect information. And so what happened a few years ago was this whole link to autism. So people incorrectly interpreted statistical data in an improperly set up control trial to say that autism was increased with vaccines, and that caused an entire bubble to be growing in the American population that is full of fear, misunderstanding, misinformation. We're also seeing by the way, my background is a clinical psychologist. We're seeing a huge swing toward people having more belief in their friends on Facebook or TikTok than with a doctor or with a scientist. And so when people have a platform to share and they share this information, it spreads far now. And so we're seeing a growing population of this anti-vax community, and that is generally what is believed to have occurred in Brooklyn when this outbreak happened. It was just one patient. But we are seeing, and we just had a measles outbreak on the West Coast, I think 2 years ago, and measles was something we were vaccinated with for years also. One of the things that's interesting to note is not all vaccines are 100% effective. I think we all just learned that from COVID. But what I will say is, so the flu vaccine any given year is about 4 to 15% effective, meaning it will not prevent you from getting 90% of the different strains of flu that are out there. However, it doesn't mean you shouldn't get your flu vaccine because it can still help you with the 4 to 15% of flu strains that are out there. Really, really effective vaccines are like 65% effective. So, especially when you have a vaccine that's only 65% effective, which is good, you have to get everyone in the room. Otherwise, you don't have the immunity that you need for everyone to be successful. The COVID vaccine, I know that a lot of data is coming out about it was only 2% effective or 0% effective. What I can say is having access to the statistics of Kettering Health, while the vaccine may not have prohibited people from getting the disease, when I looked at an inpatient census of hospital, about, I think it was, of all of our COVID inpatients, 93% were not vaccinated. So you can infer, now we don't have enough of it, and we don't have enough test subjects to actually say that this is for the entire population, but you can infer that the vaccine did help keep them out of the hospital. It may not have prevented them from the disease or side effects. Other questions? All right, yes, Jack, last one.
I'm dumbfounded that you say that only something like 1 out of 200 people that get polio get paralysis.
Mhm.
How do you diagnose whether somebody has polio if my impression has always been that polio results in paralysis. How do you diagnose people get polio and don't get paralysis?
So I'm gonna have to bow out of answering that one because I'm not an expert enough to answer that. The only thing I can give is when we look at statistics, we can look at all the people that have tested positive and what their symptoms are and come to conclusions based on that data. But yes, I'm so sorry. I'm not a physician or anyone in the infectious disease arena.
Is this a routine test or something that they?
We currently don't test for polio unless there's indications of it.
How about that?
Any numbers, other, or which one is it? No, so I do know that there's indications, so sorry. So in a lot of blood tests, we can see commonalities, and with our EMR and automation nowadays, they can flag actually like this is at risk for sepsis, this is at risk for some of the more prevalent diseases that we have nowadays. So we can identify common characteristics or symptoms of a disease, make inferences to what might be there, and then test to validate our hypothesis. But polio being so eradicated in the United States for so long, I don't know how they caught that person had polio, and that's why she was experiencing her symptoms.
My wife was one of them.
Really.
She had polio, but was not paralytic.
Oh, very cool. 1 in every 200 to 1 in every 2,000, depending on the virus type. Yes, Ed.
Can the virus settle in other parts of the body?
To all of the literature I read, it lives in your throat and intestines, which is why it spreads through droplets and feces. But you could get paralyzed in any part of your body. So you can have paralysis of your respiratory muscle. I don't actually think I've heard of any cardiology or cardiac related paralysis, but your limbs were very common. Most common were limbs. But respiratory was, of course, one of them. Okay.
If polio is totally eradicated, there are no cases in the world, and you stop vaccinating, will it reoccur?
Yes, because the vaccine does not eliminate the virus. It protects an individual from the virus. So unless you can eliminate the virus, there will always be a need for vaccines or until a new technology is developed.
So there's no such thing as herd immunity for polio.
Herd immunity is only obtained through a vaccine or through being infected. If we stopped giving out vaccines, people would reach immunity through living through the virus and having been infected in the past. And that's where you would see the paralysis, the meningitis, the flu-like symptoms return. Okay, one more. I saw one more over here.
That's my question.
So thank you for your time. If you have more questions, let me know. My cell phone was up there. Give me a call or give me a text if you're interested in going, or if you want to be connected to money, or if you have money to connect to somebody that wants to go. Thank you.
And as is our custom, we will donate a book in honor of our speaker here. This is Ms. Frogbottom's Field Trips. I want my money. So field trip, I don't know, there's a connection with traveling to Rotary. Thank you, Beth. Okay, so next week, Chris Hadley and Dave Dunn are our greeters. Our program again is our district governor, introduced by our assistant governor. Keep an eye on the website for upcoming programs. It's a great opportunity to get people to come to the club and consider membership. We have great programs, thanks to Pete and the crew. Is there anything else for the good of the club? Okay, so everybody will rise for the pledge. Sure, if you would lead us, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good.
Nice to have you. Meeting's quick, ain't that?
It's all right.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the next step? You go to the when you leave?
So next one is October 5, and then 2 October.
Wow. Wow, I'm tired already. Possibly, we could write a book. 40. I don't know. Gosh, everything has. I'll be in there. Yeah, oh well. She does. Yep. And then I'm trying to. God leads me, and I'm curious, and curious, oh, Cheryl, we're going go and figure.
Hey, I'm very good.
Okay, so, and later. That's how it's 6 years. Yeah. I don't. But the